A Tall and Small Collection, Season 2, Chapter 23, Sick Day. Ray had been home in the confines of the borrower comforts for the past few days. He felt a little achy, had a slight cough, and was using it as a perfect excuse to work on his pesky projects. Hero had also been busy, so hanging out with him hadn't happened in about a week. Plus, with everything that happened recently with him and with Sam, Ray had to take a moment to make sure he was ready for anything his comrade had to throw at him. This was why Ray decided to take a couple of days and get over his cold. Today, Ray felt a little better, so Soren decided to go out and see who he called a friend of his. Most likely it was Bay. Ray noticed that it was the exact same language he used when he met Lucy, so Ray knew something was going on. It wasn't really his business, but there was something about the way Soren was seeing whoever it was. For one thing, it was definitely becoming more frequent. Then again, Soren deserved some time to enjoy life. He had a lot of bad things happen, and he deserved to be happy. Ray had his own thoughts about what, or rather, who, could make Soren happy, but kept those thoughts to himself. Those thoughts were far from his mind today, however, as he rushed through the walls. He had shuffled out of his room for a drink of water when he noticed Maisie lying down in the living room on the floor, Bunny off to the side. Her cheeks were a bright rosy red, and she was coughing. She was fine this morning, but didn't have a lot for breakfast, but she did that from time to time. She had a little cough, like Ray and Dorian, but it hadn't gotten this bad. Was it going to get much worse? Ray didn't want to find out. He grabbed a glass of water and brought it over to Maisie, hoping he could get her to drink a little something. However, when he rushed over and touched her face, he felt how his little niece was burning up. She whimpered and squirmed at the brush of his fingers. Ray sat Maisie up and pressed the cup to her lips. "Here, Maisie, take a sip. Want a drink?" asked Ray. Maisie's eyes fluttered open, and she took a few sips. Ray felt elated. Being sick meant you needed liquids, and if she was drinking, he knew what to do, right? His victory, sadly, was short-lived. She looked over at him sleepily, a glaze over her eyes and snot dripping from her nose. In an instant, she leaned over and lurched, upchugging what little bit she had from breakfast, as well as the water she just took. Maisie coughed and was only awake for a few seconds after getting sick down her front before she fell unconscious, pulled back into a sickened slumber. This was bad. Ray had seen something like this before. They all had it when... No. A chill ran down his spine as memories were pulled to the forefront of his mind. They didn't know what to do before, but things were different now. Trembling, he pulled Maisie up into her backpack and wrestled it onto his back before heading as fast as he could through the walls to the kitchen. Dorian wasn't back yet, so he had to be down with Ashlyn, right? Another round of coughs made Ray move faster, leaping over a couple of beams when he knew he should have been more cautious. "Hang on, Maisie. You're gonna be fine," he said over and over, as if saying it would make it true. He rounded the corner and saw the secure line. Perfect. He slid down it and landed on the edge before bursting through the electrical cover to the countertop. He saw Dorian's practice bag and the electronic device, but he wasn't on the counter. His mind began to panic. Dorian wasn't there. Why wasn't he there? He should be practicing music. The teen's eyes darted off to the clock on the oven. Ashlyn should be home now, right? Ears ringing, lungs screaming for air, and ruled entirely by adrenaline. Ray could think of nothing else to do but call out at the top of his lungs. "Dorian! Ashlyn!" He hated that he sounded so desperate and panicked, but Maisie's sudden round of gasping coughs right by his ear sent his heart rate skyrocketing. he heard a shuffle in the next room. They were here. Ray? Ashlyn's voice drifted through the air cautiously. Ray? Is everything okay? Ashlyn's curious tone, filled with concern, in a split second reminded Ray of his mother's tone. It was warm and reassuring and kind, and he was at a loss for what to do for his little niece. Tears in his eyes, he choked back the tightness in his throat to call out again. No, it's not... Maisie! He couldn't finish. All he could do was begin unstrapping her harness off of his back and cradle his brother's child as she whimpered and shivered in his grasp. Instantly, Ashlyn pushed her laptop off of her lap and loosely grasped Dorian to keep him from tumbling off of the blanket as she stood and walked into the kitchen. By the sound of it, Ray was distraught. What was going on? She stepped into the kitchen, Dorian in hand, and immediately saw the borrower teen holding Maisie. Ray had fallen to his knees, Maisie cradled in his arms. His whole body was shaking, but he managed to look up into her eyes. Dorian leaned over Ashlyn's fingers and instantly tensed. Ray, what happened? Is Maisie okay? Called Dorian. Ashlyn lowered Dorian to the countertop as she knelt to hear Ray better. She just got worse a little bit ago. She was coughing, and then she started wheezing. She passed out and is all snotty. Dorian, it's like before. I don't know where Soren is, and she's burning up. And Ray, take a breath, directed Ashlyn. Her voice cut through Maisie's wheezes and whimpers, just long enough to snap Ray out of his scare. Are you okay? Are you hurt? Do you feel sick? Ray barely managed to nod. I'm not hurt, but I have a cough and I haven't felt well, but Maisie. Ray, said Ashlyn, as her hand came behind Ray and brushed against his back. He leaned into the pad of her finger, even though it made his back ache deep in his bones. One thing at a time. So, you're feeling sick too? Ray nodded and tried to breathe deeply and calmly as he held Maisie closer. She whined and squirmed again, but didn't wake up. Ray felt that her skin was clammy from the sweat, but she was shivering harshly. He wasn't able to stop his own shaking. Why was he suddenly cold? Ray, how long has she been like this? Asked Dorian, as he saw both of them. He knelt down and laid the back of his hand against Ray's forehead. Ray, you feel warm. Ray was shivering too. Not long, stammered Ray, as he fought his teeth chattering. As soon as I noticed, I tried giving her water, but she threw that up, stammered Ray. Ray, may I see Maisie? Asked Ashlyn. Instinctively, Ray held his little niece closer and looked down at her. Ashlyn saw his hesitation. The last time someone was sick like this, Lucy, she slipped away. It was like, by letting her go, he was giving up. Ray, you did so good bringing her here. You helped her all by yourself. Now, let me help you both, okay? Smiled Ashlyn. Ray looked up into Ashlyn's comforting blue-gray eyes and nodded. Ashlyn slowly extended her hand and stood as Ray laid Maisie down onto Ashlyn's fingertips. Ashlyn didn't need a thermometer to know Maisie was burning up, dangerously so. Her little cough was pitiful. Ashlyn hoped her face didn't convey how worried she actually felt while holding the borrower baby. They came to her so many times before. They relied on her, just like she relied on them. They needed her, and she needed them. And she refused to let the one time she failed be with Maisie. Ashlyn needed to tend to Maisie, but she still needed the boys' help. She didn't have any special equipment to listen to Maisie's lungs, and she was so small. Ashlyn didn't want to hurt Maisie, as she was trying to help her. "Ray, do you know where Soren is, or where he might be? It's not like him to just wander off," Ashlyn asked, as she readjusted her fingers to sit Maisie up slightly. Ray gave a vague shrug in response. He said he was just going to go see Bae, but he didn't say when he was going to get back. Sometimes he's gone all day when he sees her," replied Ray, obviously starting to come down from his adrenaline high and looking sicker by the second. This wasn't what caught Ashlyn's immediate attention. It was the mention of a her. Someone else. And her name was Bae. Ashlyn had to brace herself against the edge of the counter and pray the borrowers didn't notice the color drain from her face. She felt her insides twist and knot, heart sinking from her chest to her toes. No. It was too late. Ashlyn shook her head quickly to snap herself out of her spiraling when she felt Maisie squirm. These boys and Maisie were the important ones right now. "Right, then, Dorian?" Ashlyn had to clear her throat and refocus her energy. "I need to know if Maisie has a rattle in her chest. Sit her up and listen as she breathes in and out. Just press your ear to her back and listen as hard as you can." Dorian did as Ashlyn directed and sat Maisie up, to which she protested weakly and pressed his ear to her back to listen. I think so," he said, unsure. "I can't tell. Maisie, can you breathe deep, like this?" Dorian tried to direct, but the toddler merely squirmed and whined, tears leaking from her eyes. "It's okay. You're doing well. First things first, you all need some liquids," stated Ashlyn. "All?" asked Dorian. "I don't know what this is, but if you've noticed anyone else coughing, you might have been exposed to something. Plus, you all live together. I noticed you've had a cough and Ray is losing his color. So, we're going to get some kind of sugary, electrolyte-filled drink for energy. I'll get some bone broth soup for you all. And you're all taking a vapor bath to clear out whatever this nonsense is." Soren walked home, feeling, in a word, confused. He spent the whole day with Bae, learning the art of what she called parkour. It was similar to any other borrowing lesson of climbing, leaping, and dodging, but it was, to Soren, more reckless. It was effective, and Soren took to it quickly, but it relied on a little more risk than he was often willing to take, except in an emergency. They laughed and joked, and it felt good. It had been too long since Soren took a moment to enjoy the company of someone else, specifically a woman his size. After climbing the exterior greenhouse wall on the roof and making their way back, Bae leaned in, and he found himself leaning back with a kiss goodbye. While it had been nice, it felt off, like something was missing. Too soon, maybe? Worried about Ray's cough? Possibly. Not right? Well, that was up for debate. Soren walked back along the beams, daring to jump down a few wires just for the rush of free-falling. The whole way home, he wondered in the back of his mind if just enjoying Bae's company would be enough to become something more. Then again, did he want it to be something more? Or was his heart pulling him to someone else? Soren stood outside his home for several minutes, collecting his fragmented thoughts before pushing the door open. "I'm home," he called as he closed the door behind him. Instantly, he knew something was off. Dorian wasn't there humming. Ray's door was open. Most telling was that Maisie's bunny was on the floor. "Guys?" Soren darted about in the house, but didn't see anyone else around. What happened? Grabbing Maisie's bunny and an extra hook, he rushed through the walls to the look-in points. They weren't in the kitchen or the living room. He went to the one in Ashlyn's room last, but didn't see them. But he could hear them. In the last check, he stood over the vent by the bathroom, and, sure enough, the sound was loudest there. There were no look-in points in the bathroom, so he ran back to the secure line they made in Ashlyn's room by the unused electrical outlet. Each place he had gone made him feel more and more uneasy. Why was no one home? They usually left a note before going anywhere, and they always made sure Maisie had her bunny. His hands gripped the line, but Soren let himself slide down faster than he would have liked until he landed harshly on the ground. The impact made him pause as the initial jolt made his once broken leg twinge. Like walking on a leg that fell asleep, Soren had to take a few steps cautiously to make sure he didn't strain or fracture anything with a healed break like he had done before. Once in the clear, he jogged to the partially cracked door in time to hear Dorian speak. "Why won't my nose stop running?" "That means it's working," said Ashlyn reassuringly. "Here's another tissue." What was working? Tissue? Soren slipped into the bathroom and was immediately hit with the smell of mint and some other pungent odor that was both overwhelming and pleasant hanging in the humid air. Ashlyn was standing with her back to the door, and she was leaning over the sink. She was still wearing her work clothes, which was unusual. When did she get back? It was late. A round of coughs and whimpers that belonged to none other than little Maisie made him stop dead in his tracks. Blood running cold, he could only listen as he was frozen in place as Ashlyn soothed his daughter. "Oh, I know, sweetheart. Do you want some more bubbles?" Ashlyn asked as she leaned forward, something that looked like a straw in her hand. Maisie's whimpers stopped, and the sound of splashing replaced it. Soren's head was swimming. He felt nauseated. Were they sick? Soren snapped out of his stupor long enough to remember how to form coherent thoughts and called out, "Ashlyn?" Ashlyn's slightly hunched posture over the sink shifted in an instant, shivering and becoming rigid as she looked over her shoulder and into his hazel eyes. The smile she gave was sympathetic at best, confirming Soren's fears that something was very wrong. "Hey, Soren, welcome to the party." "Soren's home?" Soren heard Ray ask, followed by a bout of coughs. "Just arrived," said Ashlyn as she glanced to Ray and then back to Soren. "How are you feeling? Sick at all? Chest tightness? Cough?" "No. What is going on?" Ashlyn nodded in response to Soren's question. "If you're not feeling sick, then come up at your own risk. Everyone up here has the sniffles and a cough," said Ashlyn. Soren nearly collapsed under these words. "Sick?" he breathed, not intending for Ashlyn to hear him. Without a second thought, he approached. "Of course I want to come up. Everyone?" asked Soren. Ashlyn knelt while keeping one hand firmly on the counter, seemingly unable to move it. As she laid her left hand on the ground, Soren clambered on without hesitation onto her palm, noting instantly how pruny her fingers were from the deep ridges in her finger pads. It was obvious she had been at this a while. The moment Ashlyn's hand crested over the side, Soren caught his first sight of what had been going on since he was away, and it felt like a punch in the gut. Ray and Dorian had stripped down to their undergarments and were sitting in the sink up to their chests in warm water. The water itself smelled like mint and something else he didn't recognize, but he couldn't place it. Both boys had snot running out of their noses, and their cheeks were flushed pink. Ray looked tired and a little worse for wear, but it was clear Dorian was fading fast. It was seeing Maisie that made his heart clench in an untouchable, aching pain. Ashlyn had Maisie sitting in a hard plastic container on her own. Ashlyn's hand was in the water, and Maisie was propped up from behind in the crook of Ashlyn's thumb and index finger, keeping her upright in the water that was just at her middle. Her chunky-cheeked face was completely flush, and she looked exhausted. Her sweet eyes dulled with a glaze that could have only come from a harsh combination of sickness and crying. Unlike Dorian and Ray, her bath had bubbles and pieces of cut-up straw floating on the top. She looked so small and pitiful, but her sweetness hadn't dulled in her sickness, as she smiled weakly when she spotted her dad and leaned back against Ashlyn's hand, nuzzling her slightly. Also, unlike Dorian and Ray, Maisie was fully clothed. Zoran flew to her side, climbing into the water, and knelt to check up on her. Her skin was burning up, but she still managed a small smile before she went into a coughing fit. Zoran, chest tight, held on to Maisie as she coughed and whimpered pitifully. Involuntarily, he started shaking. How long had she been like this? It must have been recent. He saw her just this morning. With how quickly it set in, could it be the same sickness as before? His mind started spiraling. He was away when all of this happened. How could he leave her? Soren. Ashlyn's fingers pressed into his back, and the sound of his name snapped him out of his mental spiral. He didn't realize he was taking in panicked breaths. She's okay. We're going to make them better. Soren locked onto Ashlyn's stormy blue-gray eyes and tried to calm his breathing, even though his heart was still beating 1,000,000 miles a minute. How? Was the only word his constricted voice could muster as memories flooded his mind. Seeing Lucy sick in bed, hearing the coughing and wheezing in the other rooms, his own chest rattling as he breathed in and out. Well, first, you all are going to be staying down here for a bit. I'd say you all need some clean clothes, and anything else you can think of that might make your stay here easier. Then, sleep and hydration. I'm going to the store to get some Pedialyte and NyQuil. We're all having my bone broth soup for dinner, and then we're going to bed, said Ashlyn. I can't leave. What if... Soren, Maisie needs a fresh change of clothes, as do the boys, and that's not something I can get them. I need you, and so do they, okay? Nothing is going to happen while you're gone, said Ashlyn. Soren knew she was right, but found letting go of his baby girl the hardest thing he had ever done at the moment. I'll be back, he whispered to her as he planted a thoughtful kiss on her temple and stepped out of the water. Ashlyn lowered him back down to the ground, and he made his way back to the electrical cover to get into their home. The entire way, he scolded himself and let the plaguing guilt overwhelm him. He was away when all of this happened. He leaned against the wall of his home more than once to keep himself grounded as his mind went off to the races. If something happened when he was away, he would never forgive himself. Forcing his mind to focus, he gathered up everything he thought he would need, including cups, clothes, and a few personal accessories before strapping it to his back and descending the walls. Once back, he helped get Maisie cleaned and dried while Ashlyn ran to the store. She brought back the things she mentioned and even found some stickers that could tell temperature. While Ashlyn fixed dinner, they set up a spot on her bedside table. They ate in silence until it came time for taking the first medicine they had ever taken. It's better if you hold your nose, suggested Ashlyn. One big mouthful, and that'll be it for the night. Sadly, they didn't take this advice and breathed too soon. Both Dorian and Ray instantly gagged and winced, tears springing to their eyes. It's gross, they gagged. Ugh, why does it burn? The lights went out while Ashlyn elected to stay up with Soren for a little while longer to make sure Maisie got fluids while she rested. Tag teamed and dripped water onto Maisie's lips using the corners of a paper towel. Ashlyn and Soren, late in the evening, shared a single look and were instantly reminded of that day years ago. Soren started thinking in the silence of the night about how similar the illnesses had been over these encounters. There had to be a connection. So, first thing, as soon as everyone was well again, was investigating the walls and finding out what was going on. If his family was sick, maybe others were too.